Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Y Pod, where we highlight everyday Wyoming leaders. Very excited today. You're in for a treat. Talking with Shane Smith, who for many, many years was involved with the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. Shane, thanks for doing this with us today.
Oh, you bet.
And for those folks who may not know, because prior to being introduced to you, I'm a bit embarrassed to say I didn't know much about the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. Could you just tell us a little bit about how special it is that we have that resource in a place like Cheyenne?
Well, yeah, it indeed is special. It's pretty much unheard of to have a public, professional staffed botanic garden in a city the size of Cheyenne. A little bit of study on the subject, and you would find that usually you have to have at least 500,000 people to support such an endeavor. So in the great Wyoming tradition of doing things we aren't supposed to do, we did a botanic garden. And the other thing that makes it very special, and it tells you what kind of idiot I am, that being a horticulturalist, I chose to work my 41-year career getting this thing going and running and to where it was when I finally retired in probably by most any measure the worst garden climate in the lower 48. Cheyenne's even worse than Casper. Cheyenne is the fourth windiest city and Casper is the fifth windiest city in the nation. Cheyenne is #1 in the nation for hail, averages 10 hailstorms a year. We have very little winter snow cover many years, not every year. Some years we have really good winter snow, but a lot of years we have less days with snow on the ground than even Denver. And that makes it hard for plants to survive. And then we have very unpredictable spring and fall frosts. So what a great place to garden for 41 years. But that's also kind of, in a way, our part of our success is because people really appreciate a green space in a place like Cheyenne more than they might in a place like even Denver or other places with not such a harsh climate. And so when we grew a petunia, people were amazed, a flowering petunia, and so it's and then to always have a greenhouse. That's part of our DNA. We've always had a greenhouse that people have worked in the wintertime, grew food in, grew educational plants, and then finally to build our 20,000 plus square foot grand conservatory and give people a really nice space to get out of the weather. That's everything that Cheyenne isn't. It's hail proof, it's humidity, it's we've got the state's tallest palm tree, and it's 3 stories. If you haven't been in it, please go. It's got 3 different levels of places you can hang out in. We've got an outdoor area as well on the 3rd floor that we designed for viewing the stars and just enjoying the view outside. But anyway, so yeah, and it's very also in our DNA is being energy smart. We've always been passive solar heated. We were the first. Our original site was east of town in a 5,000 square foot greenhouse, and it was the first large size passive solar heated greenhouse. In 1997, we were the first botanic garden in the nation to add photovoltaics, solar electricity. We were the first community garden project in the state, with the exception of a few victory gardens that occurred during World War II. We also started the state's first farmers market in downtown Cheyenne, and we helped a number of other communities across the state do that. And so yeah, it's unique in that way. It's also we won some wonderful awards, not because we were big and amazing, and more because we were scrappy and did things in a different way that was always people oriented. Volunteers, we couldn't have done it without volunteers. We were a 2-person staff for probably our first 13 years or so, even when we moved into the city park in 1986. And so we won awards from Ronald Reagan for exemplary volunteerism. We won an award from George Bush, Senior, first George Bush, and President Bush. And that was we were the 83rd Point of Light. George Bush awarded 1,000 Points of Light awards to volunteer operations. And I got to meet George Bush when he flew into Cheyenne the year we got that award, and got to visit with him about our project, which was a real honor. And then later on, we won an award from the, what's the name of that organization? Oh, community partner, I can't think of it. But anyway, it was the American Entrepreneurial Leadership, and it was given in association with Bill Clinton. And we were invited to the White House to meet Bill Clinton, and then that meeting got canceled. We were in DC for the ceremony, but the meeting with the president got canceled because he was dealing with North Korea threatening to blow up nuclear bombs. So things don't change much. But anyway, so we were very pleased that we had actually been recognized by 3 different presidents during our tenure.
It's pretty incredible. And I'm sure people are curious when you said earlier the idea of you chose to spend your career in one of the worst places possible for a botanist, a farmer, someone who grows things. And the person on the screen right now played a fairly critical role in that, if I remember you saying that right.
Yeah, that's Gary Garber, and we initially started under the umbrella of Community Action of Laramie County, which is an organization dedicated to fight poverty. They were kind of based on some of the earlier anti-poverty programs that Lyndon Johnson started, but at this point in time, Lyndon Johnson wasn't president. That picture was probably taken in 1976. Gary Garber was a Vietnam veteran, and he's the guy who hired me, and he's the guy who found the initial money for building 3 small greenhouses, and then that gave us impetus to build a 5,000 square foot greenhouse, which is where we really started. And we operated out of that site for 9 years. And we worked, it evolved over the first few years, and then it really kind of got set in concrete that we were operated with the help of seniors, kids, and handicapped folks. Some people like to use the word disabled. I like the word handicap better than disabled because I don't like the word dis in front of able. So my own bias. But anyway, those 3 groups really provided the labor to garden inside and outside this building. We also started the first wheelchair accessible orchard at that site, which was, we used recycled runway matting from Vietnam for a surface and prune the plants in a way that all the tree is totally accessible from a wheelchair, kind of in an what we call an espalier tunnel of fruit. And we grew apple trees in there, and it was really great. And this shot is one of the 3 small solar heated greenhouses we built. This is 76, and they did so well. People just couldn't believe it. They grew food without any added energy. It's passive solar. It was double layer of outer layer of corrugated fiberglass, an inner layer of polyethylene, and then heavily insulated east, west, and north walls, and then 55-gallon drums filled with water to provide a thermal mass that held in the heat. And then we insulated around the base of the foundation, and worked beautifully. And we built those with kids who were either working off court fines or in different programs to help youth. And those were mostly on the south side of Cheyenne. I think one wasn't. And then when we finished building this structure, this is the full-size structure. We were here from 77 to 86. And once we got it done being built, and I was living in Fort Collins, driving up, volunteering to help get it built. And then it was done, and Gary Garber said, gosh, nobody here is a horticulturalist. And I had just graduated about 6 months prior in CSU horticulture. I grew up in Denver, and so I said, well, I'll do it, you know. And so he hired me right there on the spot. I think I was making $400 a month. And I was so proud of myself that I actually had a salary. And I lived in a Airstream trailer on site, and ended up lived with a girlfriend at the time who was from New York City. and and we would live in that trailer, and it would rock in the wind, and we'd wake up and find little sand dunes under the windows because there was so much dust out there blowing around, and there wasn't much out. This is about 5 miles from the center of town, off of Whitney Road and I-30 or Highway 30. And so, yeah, we built it with volunteers. This woman on the left, she was immigrated from Russia. She was a plumber by training. She did all the plumbing on it. We had an electrician volunteering who broke his leg. And there's a slide, I don't think you have it, but there's a slide of him holding a wire in place with his crutch. And there's a 16-year-old kid wiring 110 together above him. And like I said, this is before OSHA existed. And so, just scrappy bunch of us, putting this building together. And much to our surprise, it worked. And we had 50-gallon drums, both as thermal mass in this structure as well, but also we built a wood stove out of 50-gallon drums to heat it at night, knowing that it's going to get pretty cold because this is out of Cheyenne, and we regularly got down to 30 below back then. Winters were much tougher in the 70s and 80s than they are now in Cheyenne. And so we lit the stoves up as winter started coming on, and they didn't work. They downdrafted, filled the place with smoke. So we're like, okay, I guess we're going to be 100% solar. And if we come in, and it was going to be a 30 below night, the first one, with the wind blowing and everything. And we came back in the next morning, and nothing had froze. It just stayed right around 32, 33 degrees. Only things that froze were right up against the windows. And so we were just 100% solar heated with an environment that would regularly get down to 33 at night and up into the 80s and 90s during the day if it was a sunny day, a sunny winter day. And but it worked. So we were fortunate.
And we'll see as we move through some of these, the experimentation that you were doing and how you were learning as you went.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
I started I was 23 years old when I started, and was there for 41 years. But frankly, it was sort of intimidating to be at that age running that place and telling a bunch of 60, 70, and 80-year-olds what to do. And they would tell me what to do as much as I told them what to do too. But we all learned from each other, and they're really special people. And this shot is, we were skimping on money all the time. And so here we are putting the north roof on this building. Like good solar greenhouses, it's solid and insulated on the north, east, and west sides. So we had to roof the north side of a greenhouse, which was unheard of. In fact, I remember taking one of my professors from CSU up here to show him what I was doing with my life. And we were building this at the time. And he thought he was going to do me a big favor. He pulled me aside away from where anybody else wouldn't hear him talking. And he said, "Shane, don't do this. This is never going to grow plants. It's unheard of to have a greenhouse with solid on the north side. It's not going to have good light. It doesn't have a heater, for God's sake. This is not going to work. Come on back. You can do a master's program and study potatoes for potato chip breeding, and we'll cover your costs and everything." And I was young and stupid and stubborn and said, "No, this is going to work. And I'll be damned if it did, But and he meant well. And so here we are putting a roof on. We got donations from 2 or 3 different roofing companies to give us their leftover shingles from jobs that they had. And so, of course, as you can see here, none of them match. And then we also, in the spirit of getting volunteers out, we had a beer distributor give us a couple kegs of beer. So everybody, this, like I said, this is before OSHA. It's before people were so safety minded. Nobody got hurt, but this was a big beer drinking roofing party. And everybody up there had probably been drinking a few too many beers and having a good old time. And we got it done. And it was quite an interesting pattern when we were done with it. So, so yeah, the thing that happened over time, the original Cheyenne Community Solar Greenhouse, which is what it was called before we renamed ourselves Cheyenne Botanic Gardens, it was set up primarily to benefit seniors, and seniors were our main labor force. But before too long, we started getting phone calls from local courts and local schools saying, we've got these kids that got in trouble. They were shoplifting or doing this or that. And we assigned them 20 hours of work after school. And we're like, sure, and so they were a good group of hardworking kids. And then we started getting kids who were Boy Scouts doing Eagle Scout projects, and we started getting kids in congressional programs. So we had the kids that were in trouble and the kids that were exemplary, and they in my mind they were all good kids. There's just a few bad parents out there. There aren't bad kids, and so they provided a nice source of labor for us. And it was just a 2-person operation forever, like I say, myself and one other assistant director. There were a few of them over time. And then we were approached by the local Goodwill agency. They said, we've got all these handicapped adults that could really do with something meaningful to work on. And so I said, yeah, why not? We found those people, and none of them were super severely handicapped. We couldn't supervise people who were super handicapped. But if they could, work independently, they came out. Down syndrome folks and mental and physical disabilities. And so they provided another labor force that I found to be more personally rewarding to work with, and also very patient people. They could spend hours cleaning up a plant and enjoy it. And then we'd send them home with food, and they would get, and it's actually a thing. I've got a degree in this as well. It's called horticultural therapy. And there's an institute that certifies you, and there's a number of colleges that offer programs in horticultural therapy, and that's using plants as a form of therapy for mental and physical disabilities. And so that's kind of what we practiced on a daily basis with seniors. And I mean, everybody came in to work, and everybody left with either a bag of food or a smile on their face, or both. And it was just really a rewarding thing for me personally. People would say, well, who gets the most therapy out of it? And I'd always say me. I have the most fun doing this. And not that there weren't challenges, there were bathroom accidents, and not physical accidents, but other kinds of cleanups, I should say. And we really had to figure ourselves out. So we had, the other thing that I find is that in our society today, modern society, seniors and kids don't interact much at all. And this is the exception of the Cheyenne Gardens, as well as handicapped folks. So the handicapped folks are often in special homes, doing special programs. I mean, more and more they're getting out, but back then it was even worse. Seniors tend to live either independently or in nursing homes or whatever. In the old days, they all lived together. Both the people with handicaps were in the home, the old with the young, the seniors were taking care of the grandkids. It was an extended family, and we've lost that in our country. And we sort of put it back together. Even though we weren't related, we became an extended family. And so seniors were taking interest in kids. So what are you doing this summer? And how's it going? And what was it like during the Depression? And what was World War II like? And, and the stories were passed around. And it really was about storytelling. And this was a generation that was around prior to television. And I found those seniors to be a lot better at telling stories than my generation is. So it was really kind of a sociological experiment in a way. to recreate an extended family that gets together every day and works in a greenhouse and a garden and interacts. And in fact, this woman here, she immigrated from Russia and had kind of a thick Russian accent. And she would come in and clean plants. Sarah Tolchinsky was her name. And one day I looked over and she was bouncing and giggling. And I go, Sarah, what's so funny? And she was cleaning up what we call a wandering Jew, which is a common houseplant. And she said, I just realized here's a wandering Jew cleaning up a wandering Jew, because she was Jewish and left Russia to come to America to have more freedoms. And we all just started cracking up. So, but there was a lot of magic.
And speaking of magic, one of the stories we talked about before we started to record was represented in this picture, and to me, represents so many of the good things, not only about the Botanic Gardens, about Cheyenne and Wyoming, but just people in general. If you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the people in the picture and how this picture came to be.
Yeah, so the gentleman on the left, his name was Howard, came to us to volunteer as a way to get over his loss of his wife, who had recently passed away. And he was in tears, just kind of an emotional wreck, to put it lightly. And we said, sure, you can volunteer. And we signed him up, and he liked to take care of the chickens, and which is a whole nother story, and just loved to garden. And he told us that the way he arrived in Cheyenne was in the Depression days, he ran away with a circus, which is kind of like a meme or something, it's something you hear about, but I've never met anybody who actually did run away with a circus. He did. And I don't think they treated him really well. This is when circuses were traveling on trains, and the circus came to Cheyenne, and he decided he was going to leave the circus and live in Cheyenne. And during the Depression, he said he used to sneak up and down alleys in Cheyenne, stealing chickens and eggs just to eat. And then he finally started his own roofing company and made a good life and built a house and raised a family. And so then one day we had, well, not one day, but over a course of a few months, we started interacting with a local church that catered mostly to Black people in Cheyenne. And we invited them to participate in our program, and they did. A number of families did. And all of a sudden, Howard said, why the hell did you let them come here? Don't let them work here. We don't want them. Totally biased, And we said, no, they're going to be here. And if you don't like it, you can leave. And he never left. And we would catch him doing some nasty little things, like he'd pretend to be watering a garden and then hit the water over on some of the Black families. And they'd yell at him, and he'd just laugh, and we'd pull him in and say, you do that again, you're out of here. And then summer came, and we started the nation's first modern day community garden, as I mentioned, and for Wyoming. And my assistant director, then Tom Throgmorton, who is now runs a landscaping business down in Fort Collins, he had this idea that at first I thought he was nuts. He put Howard next to a Black family. And I thought, this is going to be fireworks. This isn't a good idea. And he said, no, let's just try it. And it was pretty calm. We trained Howard to quit watering and treating him bad, and quit saying things to him that were racist. And finally, Howard one day got sick, and he was in bed for about a week or more. And the family, the Black family that was gardening next to him, started taking care of his garden. And when Howard came back, he found that out, and he couldn't believe it. And he started talking to them and realizing they were just nice people. And then they went on a trip, and he took care of their garden. And then they started trading baked goods and food and garden stuff. And one day he came to me and he said, those Black people aren't so bad after all. I never met one in my life. And so really his bias was something he was just told, and he never interacted with a Black person in his whole life. And once he did, wasn't racist anymore. He realized they were good people, and just and that's why this picture is so poignant. You know, they just became very fond of each other, and he looked out for them, and they looked out for him, and it's I think there's a lot of poignant messages in that, considering what's going on in our country right now.
A great thing for you to be a part of. I
Yeah,
can only imagine.
yeah. So yeah, so this slide, as I said, I grew up in Denver, city boy, but when I went to college, I was encouraged by a cousin who actually lived in Grand Junction to raise chickens, and we had this this house we were living in with a pretty large lot while I was going to college, and we started raising chickens and goats in the middle of Fort Collins. And so I learned a bit about raising animals. And in fact, they told us to stop doing that, the city of Fort Collins, because our goats had escaped and caused some trouble in the neighborhood. Long story, stupid college kids. And so they passed a law in Fort Collins that my friends dubbed Shane and Rick Law, which outlawed keeping goats and chickens because the law didn't exist till we tried doing it. And but now we have this place outside of Cheyenne, and we kind of became a little farm in a way. So we started, and I also had learned from another friend in my younger days, high school and college, how to raise bees. So I thought, well, why not? That fits in perfect with what we're doing with a garden. We can feed garden scraps to chickens. We need our gardens pollinated. We started teaching kids how to keep bees. You know, God knows what the liability would have been if one of them had a reaction, but nobody had any problems. We were lucky. And so we actually kept turkeys, chickens, and geese, and built a big walk-in chicken coop. And in fact, the turkeys ended up saving the day for us because our gardens one summer were just getting decimated by grasshoppers. And some old timer said, well, you can get rid of those grasshoppers, just use your turkeys. I'm like, what? I didn't know that. And so we had kids, we gave kids a bamboo pole, and we'd have them walk the turkeys. They tap the pole on either side of the turkey, keep them, you know, where you want them to be, and the turkeys would just eat every last grasshopper out of the garden. It was just pure protein to them. And the gardens were saved thanks to the turkeys. And then when Thanksgiving came around, my assistant director and I, Tom, we decided we were going to butcher them. Can't be that hard. We'd never butchered a thing in our life. But so we promptly cut the head off and tried to butcher the turkey. And we had no idea what the hell we were doing. It took us days to pluck it. We were pulling things out of the turkey, looking at each other, going, have you ever seen this in Safeway? And if we hadn't, we'd throw it in the trash. And we ended up with, gosh, we had about a 20+ pound turkey, and we ate it for a big Thanksgiving potluck with all of our volunteers. And we, over time, and we did this many summers in a row, over time we learned the right way to butcher turkeys and how to deal with them. And so we all learned a lot over time. And we did not carry that effort over to the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens when we moved to the city park in '86. It just was too much to do, and it was illegal in Cheyenne. So, but now chickens are legal, so who knows?
Well, it's quite a thing to picture if you imagine going to the Botanic Gardens and just picture a group of kids shepherding turkeys across it. It would be a radically different thought process.
Yeah. So anyway, so as I mentioned, the heater didn't work in this structure, but it did keep warm, and we ended up with a winter agricultural environment that was unheard of. There were no books that I could look at to teach us how to deal with an environment that got down to 33 at night and 70, 80, 90 during the day. So we experimented, and we tried all kinds of crazy things, and we slowly figured out schedules, varieties, techniques to get good crops and in that environment. And as a result of that, I wrote the first book on gardening in a solar greenhouse. The Bountiful Solar Greenhouse is the title of the book. And then my subsequent book, which was a broader take on greenhouse gardening, is Greenhouse Gardener's Companion. And but this is one example of one of our experiments. You're looking at a crop of cantaloupe. And our first try at cantaloupe, when the cantaloupes, and we wanted to grow vertical to make the best use of space. Space is limited in a greenhouse. And so we planted these cantaloupe and learned how to hand pollinate them. You don't have pollinators in a greenhouse. You got to hand pollinate everything, which we were taught a lot from Gene Howard, who was the last director of the High Plains Horticulture Research Station west of Cheyenne. In fact, there's a beautiful bronze sculpture of him on the northern end of the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. He was an amazing horticulturalist. He's responsible for all kinds of varieties that are still for sale in catalogs today. If you look for the Fort Laramie strawberry or the Ogallala strawberry, they're still out there. They're still treasured. There weren't cold hardy strawberries until he started breeding. But anyway, he taught us how to pollinate these cantaloupe, and the cantaloupe would form and they'd rip the whole vine down. They weighed so much, you know, when cantaloupe weighs 3-4 pounds. And so we had this crazy idea that we could support the cantaloupe with nylon stockings. And so all of our elderly senior ladies were bringing in their old nylon stockings, and after we pollinated them and they started to form, we would tie them up onto a cantaloupe tunnel. And as you can see, we got a really good crop of cantaloupe, and very tasty. And so we learned how to grow vertical, how to manage that melon crop in a greenhouse, and I'm sure other people knew how to do that before we did, but it was really just that tough environment of what would grow, what wouldn't grow, normally in a greenhouse, you just turn the heat up, you know. If it's going to be minus 30 outside, it's always going to be 60 degrees inside at nighttime. We didn't have that luxury. So we just really had to figure a lot of things out. And we did. And we were in that greenhouse from 77 to 86. And by the time we were done, we had a pretty figured out. We also started because we were operating under an umbrella of a nonprofit, Community Action, which had a tumultuous time. They actually were caught embezzling twice, certain employees. We started keeping parallel books so they couldn't steal our money because that was going on. And so that's why we were actively trying to get under the city of Cheyenne and build a new greenhouse. That greenhouse was starting to fall apart. It was, humidity was just taking it apart. And eventually, it's a kind of a long story, but eventually we became part of the city in 86 and moved on. But we had a store. We sold plants to make 25% of our income. So we sold bedding plants, trees, shrubs, seeds, fertilizer, and we had a pretty good clientele. And we had handicapped folks running the cash registers and helping people with what they're going to buy. So we grew bedding plants. And so when we moved to the city and built the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens, the first structure we were in, which still exists, it's the structure to the left of the Grand Conservatory, we traded that commercial effort for growing all the bedding plants for the city of Cheyenne. And we planted them as well, which is a major effort. We grew 50,000 bedding plants set on our grounds and every big park and parkway, that had a flower bed. So we really beautified Cheyenne, and we had to figure out what flowers could survive the 10 hailstorms that we would get. A lot of petunias. Petunias are one of the best plants for coming back after hail. And so that was a major volunteer staff effort. Everybody was bending over planting, including me. So,
and the innovation that you did inside the gardens, I was also intrigued by how innovative you were in all aspects of the business. Fundraising, partnerships, sponsorships. Could you speak a little bit about the farmers market aspect of what you guys did?
Yeah, it was there was no such thing as a farmers market in the whole state of Wyoming. I think Colorado had a few of them. And I think this was 1980. And so we had this idea to start a farmers market. We had a couple of Vista employees, which is kind of like domestic Peace Corps. And so I assigned them to help us figure out how to start a farmer's market. And so they did some research, and we started contacting farmers from as far away as Grand Junction, Greeley, just wherever there were farmers. And we invited them to our first market, and it was held in Holiday Park. And you can see our fancy banner we hand painted, and so it was a great success, and just what we needed to do, work Saturdays too. And so we were open, running things 6 days a week pretty much. But we eventually tried to move downtown, and the then mayor said, no, you guys can't use city land to do a farmer's market. That's going to be disruptive to commerce and everything. And finally he relented, and we did. And next thing you knew, we were the heroes of downtown. We talked about moving up to Frontier Days and holding the market, which we did actually one time. And the merchants were like, no, don't leave. You're bringing more people downtown than we've ever seen on a Saturday morning. And then at the end of each market, we would go around and collect food that the farmers weren't going to be able to get rid of. And we took that to feeding programs like Salvation Army and Needs Incorporated, which feeds senior citizens. And so it was really a nice social thing. And of course, we ran it primarily with volunteers and our whopping 2 staff, myself and my assistant director. And so we're proud to see it's still going on. When we moved to City Park and became Cheyenne Botanic Gardens, we spun that endeavor off to Community Action of Laramie County, which last I checked still runs the farmers market on Saturdays. And I believe there's a Tuesday market as well. So, but as I mentioned, this slide's kind of interesting because this sort of exemplifies horticultural therapy. Like I say, you can get a degree in it. A number of universities provide training using horticulture as a mode of therapy for people with various disabilities. But this gentleman was raised the old-fashioned way, where he was raised near Evanston on a family farm until his last parent died. And so he'd never been institutionalized. And so they shipped him to Cheyenne for some reason. And he enrolled in the Goodwill program and lived at the Goodwill housing. And they brought him out to us saying, hey, this is Louis. He's got a number of problems. He's hard of hearing. He's mentally functional at about a 5-year-old. And but he can physically do things. He's a really sweet gentleman. And can you work with him? And we did. And this is his first day on the job. I took this picture of him, and he wasn't real happy. And he would get things done for us, and we found different jobs for him. And after I took another picture of him, I don't know if you even have that slide, but I took another picture of him a year later, and he's just looks like a different person. You could just see the spirit of how he changed. Smiling, he'd made friends. He had this funny habit of walking on one of our many windy days. He'd walk to the edge of our property and do what a lot of us wish we could do. And that is, he would start screaming at the wind, stop it, just stop it. And then he'd come back in and with a smile on his face, like he felt like he actually did something. And we were like, thanks, Louis, it's slowing down out there. And but he really didn't, they outfitted him with hearing aids, and he didn't like that because that meant he had to listen to you and do what you told him to do. And so on weekends, he would take walks around downtown Cheyenne, and he'd walk a couple different times. He walked over the railroad track viaduct and take his hearing aids and throw them on a train. And they finally, really got down on him because hearing aids weren't cheap. And said, you cannot do that. But he was a lot happier if he didn't have to listen to you. So Louis was one of our many characters. Yeah, there you can kind of see Louis in the background of that. Yeah, it's kind of hard to make out, but yeah, but he changed. So the sun here is setting on the original Cheyenne Community Solar Greenhouse, and it was 1985, 86, and it was setting on it. We were getting threatened with funding loss. Building was having structural problems. We almost went under a few different many different times. I always tell the story. Many people have heard this story, but people think it was just a wonderfully well planned out success story, and it really wasn't. The reason the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens is even in existence is really fluky. There was one of our many times where we almost lost 25% of our local funding from city council for doing social work. We got word that the city was going to take that money and do something else with it. And we counted the city council votes and we figured out that we're done. We just don't have the votes to survive. And so I gathered all my seniors together and I said, you know, we're probably going to be closed in a week or two, just to let you know. And I'm really sorry. It's been fun, but the city council's not going to go for it. And so that was the day that later that night, the city council was going to vote on it. And one of my seniors broke into tears. She was, and unbeknownst to me, she was going to go get her hair done that afternoon. And in the middle of getting her hair done, she broke into tears again with her hairdresser. And the hairdresser's like, what's wrong? Well, they're closing this place down and it's my whole life. You know, I get fresh food, my friends, I get exercise, we're gardening in the wintertime. And she said, well, you know, my husband is the president of the city council. I'm going to have a little talk with him over dinner tonight before the city council meeting. And she read him the riot act, I guess, and said, don't you dare vote against that little garden project east of town. And he was a definite no vote prior to that. And so sure enough, he voted yes, and we won the vote by 1 vote. And so our money was stable again. And he came up to me, big, intimidating guy, you know, and I started this job when I was I was 23 when I started it. And I was probably, 24 or 5. This guy's like 6'4", construction company owner, and a big cowboy hat, walked up to me and poked me in the chest and said, you better not screw up out there. My wife gave me a whole ration of trouble tonight, and I didn't want to vote for you, so you guys better do good things. I'm going, we're doing our best, you know. And that wasn't the only time that a fluky little thing happened that saved us. But, you know, when you think about it, there would not be a Cheyenne Botanic Garden if that older lady had not got her hair done that day. So, and that's how life is, you know, you look back and you see different stories about if the weather weren't a certain way, George Washington wouldn't have been successful in a battle and there wouldn't have been a United States, you know, or, you know, there's a lot of things that we think were just meant to be, but they really are just crazy little flukes. And I had no thought that I would spend a 41-year career, and then I ran the nonprofit for another year or two after that. The Friends of the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens in Cheyenne. I fully expected that I'd move on to something else. But Cheyenne is one of the secrets to our success is that Cheyenne really was a place that allowed for experimentation and creativity. I'd get people from Boulder and other quote unquote progressive towns saying, oh, we want to do that in our town. And they go back and they try and they couldn't do it. You know, they want to form committees and discuss it forever, and they weren't creative enough with money. And we're in Cheyenne that, you know, we make our case and people go, well, what the heck, let's try it, you know. And so it was really a friendly, open-minded place. And Cheyenne, I made the statement that Cheyenne has a tradition of doing things it's not supposed to do. And one of the best ways to exemplify that is Frontier Days. If Cheyenne didn't have Frontier Days and they sent out RFPs to request for proposals, there's no way Cheyenne would land the biggest outdoor rodeo in the country. But Cheyenne did it anyway, and they did it with volunteers. And they, you know, unlikely as it could be, Cheyenne does things like that. And so it's a fitting tradition that we did something we weren't supposed to do, and we did it with volunteers to make it happen in a climate that it never should have happened, but it did. And it really is a testament to a can-do attitude of the people of Cheyenne that was really refreshing. And I'm hoping that that is still in the city's DNA for many generations, because that's what makes that town great.
On behalf of everyone who already has been to the Botanic Gardens and enjoyed it, thank you for everything you did to make it happen, to play a part in it. And as you mentioned earlier, for those people who have not yet been to the Botanic Gardens, it's a wonder to see. I think it would be impressive anywhere, but certainly in Wyoming makes it even more so.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's like I say, it's had national recognition, and it continues to get recognition, and a lot of people don't get what a challenge it is. You know, you get tourists. Many a time we had tourists come like 3 days after a hailstorm, and they'd come in and they'd greet a volunteer working at the front desk and go, "You call this a botanic garden? Looks like crap out there." And they go, "Well, sir, we just had baseball-sized hail." And they'd say, "Oh, we have hail in our town." It's like, "But you don't understand our hail. Well, give us a few weeks. We'll get it back looking good." But, you know, it's, you know, there's a lot of challenges out there.
Well, Billy, thank you for doing this. I just mentioned Billy by accident. Billy Adelman is the one who recommended we connect for this. And he was on my mind because I think he's going to be so excited to hear the history.
Billy was a wonderful board member. And I should mention too, I've mentioned energy, solar energy. I've mentioned volunteers. The third part of our triad of success that I tend to call it is a nonprofit board, nonprofit operation that fundraises. So it's run by the city of Cheyenne, part of what used to be called Parks and Recreation. But we also have a nonprofit arm, which is pretty much paid for all of our grounds, fundraising. We've raised millions over the course of our history. We formed that nonprofit in late, it was early 90s, somewhere in there. And so many wonderful board members over the years volunteered their time to help us oversee the funds that we've raised. And we 100% raised the money for the Cheyenne Paul Smith Children's Village. We raised, over $1 million, I'm pretty sure, if I remember right. We raised another $1 million to finish the completion of the Grand Conservatory. So having that nonprofit public-private partnership has been crucial to our success, and has been a vocal advocate to keep the gardens what it is and true to its spirit. So we've got to give all those folks, including folks like Billy Adelman, who have served on that board, and many others over time, kudos for their work too.
Absolutely. Well, Shane, thanks again for everything you did on the gardens, and thanks for doing this today. I hope lots of people get to see it.
It's a pleasure.